What happens when you put ordinary people in extraordinary situations? Can we really trust our own minds and instincts, or are we more easily influenced than we realize? In this video, we're going to dive into some of the most controversial psychological experiments of all time to try to figure it out. Now, this is the fourth part of the series, so if you haven't checked out the other ones, I'll make sure that I link the whole playlist below, and other than that, we're just going to jump right on into it. Alright, we're starting off tier 2 with the Bystander Effect Experiment, also known as Latane and Darley. Now, on March 13, 1964, Kitty Genevieve was murdered in front of her home. She parked her car a number of feet from her apartment when all of a sudden a man named Winston Mosley chased her down and stabbed her in the back twice. Due to the excruciating pain, Kitty screamed for help and a neighbor responded by shouting at the criminal, "Leave that girl alone," immediately after getting the attention of the criminal. Basically, Winston ended up fleeing the scene and left the girl crawling towards her apartment. Several witnesses reported to have seen Winston flee the scene with his car and then basically return 10 minutes later and stab her again, okay? Truly messed up person. Now, after this, he also stole money and sexually assaulted Miss Genevieve. A neighbor then phoned the police and an ambulance arrived, but it was too late to help save her. She actually ended up passing. 38 neighbors of Kitty Genevieve were aware about the murder that was taking place, basically during it taking place, and yet all of them chose to do nothing, like an attempt to rescue her, basically. Kind of messed up. They all just kind of sat around and listened and watched and waited. Why were such apathy, indifference, and lack of concern observed from all of the neighbors of Kitty? Two social psychologists started asking these questions and why the witnesses demonstrated a lack of reaction towards her need for help at all, basically. This ended up coming into the bystander apathy experiment. John Darley and Bib Latane thought of a social psychology experiment that will let them see through an event similar to what took place during the murder of Kitty Genevieve. First, they recruited university students and told them that they will be participating in a discussion about personal problems. Each participant will be talking to other participants of varying numbers in a discussion group, but each of the participants has separate rooms. Basically, they won't be seeing each other. This conversation will take place over microphones and speakers just so that the participants will basically not be able to physically see each other, just like I just said. And basically, the topic upon which the conversation will revolve around is their college lives. So they're just going to be talking about all their personal problems around college and all this, just so we're on the same page. Each participant will be given 2 minutes to speak during their turn. All the microphones of other participants will be turned off. The subject is unaware that all the voices that you hear will all be pre-recorded voices. So that's where the experiment comes in. The number of voices that the subject will be talking to depends on the treatment condition that he is actually in. Or they're in, my bad. There are 5 treatment conditions. First is a solo one-on-one conversation, and the last is a group of 6 participants, 1 subject and 5 pre-recorded voices. One of the pre-recorded voices is that of an epileptic student who is having seizures. The voice will first confess to the group that he is prone to seizures and it could be life-threatening during its first turn. Its second turn, the seizures actually start to happen. The real subject can only hear the event and he cannot actually see the participant who is having the seizure. Now, the actual response that is like the thing that the experimenters are measuring during this event is the time that it takes for the subject to stand up, leave the room, and either look for the person that needs help or look for help. Just anyways, you know what I mean? Looking for somebody to help this guy at this point, you know what I mean? Now, the astonishing part of this is only 31% of the subjects tried to seek help at all. This means that most of the subjects didn't bother to look for the experimenters to help the suffering participant. Most of them were obviously anxious, but the reaction just wasn't there at all. However, the significant finding of this experiment lies in the result in the first treatment condition. In a one-on-one conversation, 85% of the subjects actually asked for help, got up, left, kind of tried to help the person having a seizure. This means that the subjects think that they are the only ones who know about the incident. There's a higher probability that they will actually go out and ask for help. On the contrary, the bigger groups displayed fewer reactions to the incident. The significantly higher percentages of subjects who ask for help in the first treatment condition entails that people react more if less number of people are around in an emergency or an event. Basically, fewer people that are around, the basically faster or the more people are actually going to react to a situation. On the other hand, the significantly lower percentage of the subjects who helped in the other treatment conditions entails that individuals are less likely to help in an emergency when other people are present. And basically, 2 reasons were offered to explain the bystander apathy effect. First is diffusion of responsibility. This occurs when other people think that another person will intervene. As a result, they feel less responsible to actually help out. The second explanation is pluralistic ignorance. This refers to the mentality that since everyone else is not reacting to the emergency, my personal help is not needed. Seeing the inaction of others will lead to the thought that the emergency is not as serious as compared to the perception when one is alone. Basically, if nobody else is reacting, then, oh, it must not be that big of a deal. Or if more people are around, oh, somebody else is going to handle this. Like, I don't really need to do anything. So that's that whole experiment. We're on to the second one. Up next is Emma Eckstein. Emma Eckstein was an Australian author. She was also one of Sigmund Freud's most important patients. Now, for all that don't know, Sigmund Freud was actually an Australian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis. And for a short period of time, around 1897, Emma Eckstein became an actual psychoanalyst herself. She has been described as the first woman analyst who became both colleague and patient to Freud. As an analyst, while working mainly in the area of sexual and social hygiene, she also explored how daydreams and those parasitic plants invaded the life of young girls. Basically, the parasitic plants refer to daydreams, okay? When she was 27, she went to Freud seeking treatment for vague symptoms including stomach ailments and slight depression related to menstruation. Freud diagnosed Eckstein as suffering from hysteria and believed that she masturbated to excess. I don't know if that was really happening, but that's what he said. And this was considered dangerous to her mental health. Her treatment lasted something in the region of 3 years and was one of the most protracted and detailed of Freud's early cases. Freud was at the time under the influence of his friend and collaborator Wilhelm Fliess, an ear, nose, and throat specialist. Fliess, whom Freud had called the Kepler of biology, had developed theories today considered pseudoscientific, including the belief that sexual problems were linked to the nose by a supposed nasal-genital connection. I don't know, he was on some weird stuff, dude. I can't even lie to you. Like, Fliess had been treating nasal reflex neurosis by cauterizing the inside of the nose under local anesthesia. Fliess conjectured that if temporary cauterization was useful, surgery would yield more permanent results. He began operating on the noses of patients diagnosed with the disorder, including Eckstein and Sigmund Freud himself. So he was operating on everybody, basically. Anybody whose nose he could cauterize, he was trying to get up in your nose. So super weird guy. His surgery proved disastrous, resulting in profuse recurrent nasal bleeding. Fliess had also left a half-meter gash in Eckstein's nasal cavity, the subsequent removal of which had left her permanently disfigured. Though aware of Fliess's culpability, Freud fled from the remedial surgery in horror. He could only bring himself to delicately basically send correspondence to Fliess the nature of his disastrous role, and in subsequent letters maintained a tactful silence on the matter, or else returned to the face-saving topic of Eckstein's hysteria. Basically, Sigmund Freud was not trying to get caught up in this whole situation at all, even though he was basically the one that was bringing up Eckstein at this time. You know, she was working with him, and basically he kind of brought her to Fliess, and basically he fucked up her face. He basically wasn't trying to take no blame, so he was basically just silent on the whole matter and was basically super delicate in everything he was talking about when he was corresponding with Wilhelm about this, or was just simply blaming it on Emma Eckstein's hysteria like he was trying to blame everything before. Freud ultimately reasserted his full confidence in Fliess's competence, making Emma responsible for the catastrophe by concluding that her post-operative hemorrhages were wish bleedings caused by her hysterical longing for the affection of others. I hope he's not just thinking like this is like she's horny so she's bleeding, or she's wishing that these bleed. Like dude, these people messed her up for life, like permanently disfigured her and then blamed it on her. Like, that is so messed up. Emma, I am sorry you had to deal with that, cuz like that sucks, but I gotta move on to the next thing because that is just too sad. Up next is the Good Samaritan experiment. In 1973, social psychologists John Darley and Daniel Batson wanted to know why people help in some situations and not others. They decided to study one allegedly charitable group, seminary students training to become priests. Basically people, you know what I mean, in church schools or whatever, seminary schools I guess is what they call it. My bad, I'm not really religious. But people that are studying to become priests, or who are supposed to be, you know what I mean, really charitable, nice people. The researchers asked each of the 67 seminary students to deliver a sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan, a Bible story about helping strangers in need. The researchers then randomly assigned the students to one of two conditions. In the hurried condition, a research assistant concluded the sermon instructions with, "Oh, you're late? They were expecting you a few minutes ago. We'd better get moving." In the unharried condition, the research assistant ended the instructions with, "It'll be a few minutes before they're ready for you, but you might as well head on over." Hence, basically, kind of not giving it too much pressure. Each student walked alone to the building where he would deliver the sermon. On the way, the student encountered a man slumped in the doorway with his eyes closed, coughing and moaning, clearly in distress. From afar, researchers watched. Would the seminary students stop to help the stranger in need, or would they just walk on by? They ended up finding out that only 10% of seminary students in their harried conditions stopped to help the man. They were all just too busy in a rush. In comparison, 63% of the participants in an unharried condition stopped. In other words, being in a hurry can lead to even a seminary student with the Good Samaritan on the mind to ignore the person in distress. How funny is that? Ironic, I guess. They're about to go deliver a sermon about helping people who need help, and they just are kind of walking right on by this guy that needs their help. Like, I don't know. To me, that's funny. That's just like irony at its core. They explained that when pressed for time, people must choose between helping and meeting other goals. But when people are not hurried, they can pursue multiple goals in order of importance. In addition, people with time to spare can broaden their attention and notice more details about their environments. And basically, people in a hurry just don't give a fuck about any of that. They're just in a rush and they're worried about whatever they're worried about. So, kind of goes to show you, but anybody in a hurry is not really going to try to help you. Only 10% of these people who were going to deliver a speech about helping people decided to help, So, food for thought. Well, we're moving on to the fourth one. Up next is the Robbers Cave Experiment. The Robbers Cave Experiment was a part of a series of studies conducted by social psychologist Muzaffar Sharif and his colleagues in the 1940s and 50s. In these studies, Sharif looked at how groups of boys at summer camps interacted with a rival group. He hypothesized that when two groups have conflicting aims, their members will become hostile to each other, even though the groups are composed of normal, well-adjusted individuals, basically just groups at odds. The participants in the study, boys who were approximately 11 to 12 years old, thought that they were participating in a typical summer camp, which took place at Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma, United States in 1954. However, the campers' parents knew that their children were actually participating in a research study, as Sharif and his colleagues had gathered extensive information on the participants, such as school records and personality test results. So honestly, this makes me wonder if these parents got paid for this at all. I mean, I'm assuming they probably should have, but who knows? This was back in the 40s and 50s. The boys arrived at the camp in two separate groups. For the first part of the study, they spent time with members of their own group without knowing that the other group even existed. The groups chose names, the Eagles and the Rattlers, and each group developed their own group norms and group hierarchies. After a short period of time, the boys became aware that there was another group at the camp, and upon learning that the other group of campers spoke negatively about their group, basically, they were kind of just plotting on them, saying like, oh, like this group is talking shit about you, these guys are talking smack about you. At this point, the researchers began the next phase of the study, a competitive tournament. Basically, this was between the groups consisting of games such as baseball and tug of war, for which the winners would receive prizes and a trophy at the end. After the Eagles and Rattlers began competing in the tournament, the relationship between the two groups quickly became intense, alright? You could feel it in the air, apparently, there, The groups began trading insults, and the conflict quickly spiraled. The teams each burned the other group's team flag and raided the other group's cabin. They were forcing it at this point. Straight up some Camp Laszlo stuff. The researchers also found that the group hostilities were apparent on surveys distributed to the campers. Campers were asked to rate their own team and the other team on positive and negative traits, and the campers rated their own group more positively than the rival group. I feel like that's kind of obvious, but during this time, the researchers also noticed a change within the groups as well. The groups became more cohesive, basically, between themselves, not with each other. To determine the factors that could reduce group conflict, the researchers first brought the campers together for fun activities such as having a meal or watching a movie together. However, this didn't work to reduce the conflict. For example, meals ended up turning into food fights and movies were just constantly harassing each other. Next, Sharif and his colleagues tried having the two groups work on what psychologists call superordinate goals, or goals that both groups cared about which they had to work together to achieve. For example, the camp's water supply was shut off, which was a ploy by researchers to force the two groups to interact, and the Eagles and Rattlers worked together to fix the problem. In another instance, a truck bringing the campers food wouldn't start. Again, this was another incident staged by the researchers, so members of both groups pulled on a rope to pull the broken truck. These activities didn't immediately repair the relationships between the two groups. At first, the Rattlers and Eagles resumed hostilities just after they finished the goal, but working on these goals basically took some time, and by the end of the trip, they were kind of all working together. The groups ended up stopping calling each other names, and perceptions of each group, as measured by the researcher surveys, improved, and friendships even began to form within members of each other's groups. So everything's starting to come together. By the end of the camp, some of the campers requested that everyone from both groups take the bus home together. One group even bought bevs for the other group, basically. They all bought drinks for the other ones on the ride home. So everything ended up working out for them in the end, and it took an entire summer, basically, to form this relationship of kids, make them have beef, and then make them get over it and make them be friends. But whatever, researchers got what they want. I want to know how much the parents got paid for this, to be honest with you, because I am not buying that they didn't get paid. But anyways, moving on to the last one for this tier 2, or part 4, whatever you want to call it. But moving on to the last entry for this. And last up for this tier, we're ending with the Bobo doll experiment. Now, the Bobo doll experiment was a study on aggression led by psychologist Albert Bandura that demonstrated that children are able to learn through the observation of adult behavior. The experiment was executed via a team of researchers who physically and verbally abused an inflatable doll in front of their preschool-aged children, which led the children to later mimic the behavior of the adults by attacking the doll in the exact same fashion. Bandura's study on aggression, the experiment for which he is perhaps best known, was carried out in 1961 at Stanford University. I don't know what's good with Stanford University, but if you've noticed a trend on this entire iceberg that I've been doing, there's like 5 or 6 that have been going down at Stanford University. They pull some really weird, seedy shit just for research, but I guess we gotta learn some way. But I don't know, I always got a little side eye when I see Stanford University. For this study, he used a 3-foot and a 5-foot, or a 1 meter and a 1.5 meter inflatable plastic toys called Bobo dolls, which were painted to look like cartoon clowns and were bottom weighted so that they would return to an upright position when knocked down. I definitely remember having one of these, for sure, multiples probably. The subjects were preschoolers at Stanford's nursery school and were divided into 3 groups. One group observed aggressive adult behavior models, another group observed non-aggressive behavior models, and the third group was not exposed to any behavior models at all, so they were just kind of like free-ranging it, free-balling it. The 3 groups were then divided by gender into 6 subgroups, in which half the subgroups were observed a same-sex behavior model and half would observe an opposite-sex behavior model. So, in the first stage of the experiment, the children were individually seated at the table in one corner of an experimental room and presented with diverting activities that had previously been shown to be at high interest to the children. And these were all in order to discourage active participation and encourage mere observation. So they didn't want these kids basically joining in on whatever the adults were doing. They just wanted them to be paying attention to them in some cases, you know what I mean? The behavior model was then taken to the opposite corner, which contained another table and chair, a mallet, a Tinker toy set, and a 5-foot Bobo doll, and was told he or she could play with these materials. In the aggressive behavior model groups, the model abused the Bobo doll both physically and verbally assaulting and making terrible statements to it, you know what I mean? Or non-aggressive statements such as, he sure is a tough fella and he keeps coming back for more, like, you know what I mean, when they would pop back up. So just really encouraging this whole aggressive behavior kind of thing, like, oh, like this guy wants it, you know what I mean? Like being really weird about it. In the non-aggressive behavior model groups, the model ignored the Bobo doll and instead quietly assembled the Tinker toys. Now, after 10 minutes had passed, the behavior models in both groups just get up and leave the room. In the second phase of the experiment, the children were taken individually into a different experimental room where they were presented with a new group of appealing toys, basically just anything you can think of: trains, fire engines, cars, dolls with like clothes and everything, baby cribs, whatever you could think of. And this was all to test the hypothesis that the observation of aggression in others would increase the likelihood of aggression in the observer. The children were subjected to aggression arousal in the form of being told 2 minutes they could no longer play with the toys. So basically they were trying to piss these kids off by saying, after 2 minutes, you can no longer play with the toys, so you only get these 2 minutes, so enjoy it, you know what I mean? The children were then told that they could, however, play with the toys in another room, where they were presented with various toys that were considered both aggressive, which were basically the 3-foot Bobo doll, a mallet, and dart guns, and non-aggressive, which were crayons, paper, farm animals, tea set, just a bunch of random stuff. And basically they had to choose. In the final stage of the experiment, the children's behavior was observed over the course of 20 minutes and rated according to the degree of physically and verbally aggressive behaviors they modeled, the results of which yielded significantly higher scores for children in the aggressive behavior models group compared with those in the non-aggressive behavior models and control group. So basically, obviously, the kids that were witnessing the aggression are more aggressive and were more physically and verbally aggressive. Subsequent experiments in which children were exposed to such violence on videotape yielded similar results, with nearly 90% of the children in the aggressive behavior groups later modeling the adult's behavior by attacking the doll in the same fashion, and 40% of those children exhibiting the same exact behavior over 8 months. Alright, so after 8 months of seeing the videotape, these kids were still aggressive, so it's literally a learned trait at that point. Now, although the study yielded similar results for both genders, it nonetheless suggested at least some difference depending on the degree to which a behavior is sex type that is viewed as more common or appropriate for a specific gender. For example, the data suggests that males are somewhat more prone to imitate physical aggression, which is a highly masculine type behavior, than females are. With male subjects reproducing more physical aggression than female subjects, there were, however, no differences in the imitation of verbal aggression, which is less sex type. Additionally, both male and female subjects were more imitative of male behavior models when it comes to physical aggression, but were more imitative of the same-sex models in terms of verbal aggression, which is basically just saying that they were more so copying the males when it came to physical aggression, and it didn't really matter the gender or whatever sex in the verbal aggression. Either way, they were copying it. So that's all I got for that. All right, and that's everything for this tier, this part of this whole iceberg. My bad, I've been slacking on this. I've just been working on a whole bunch of other videos. Make sure you guys check those out. Make sure you tell a friend to tell a friend. Choke that like button out, you know what I mean? Give it a good gash, a 1.5 meter gash, whatever. Other than that, appreciate you watching if you made it this far, and stay safe, stay dangerous. I'll catch you guys later.